I am so very excited to invite my guest today to join me in just a second for today's chat. Kevin Clayton and I were introduced by a mutual friend not too long ago who just said, quote unquote, you two need to know each other. From our very first conversation, I felt a tremendous amount of synergy, alignment, and really a connected friendship that now we have connected a number of times and just continue to say, how can we be voices together in positive change in the world? Kevin Clayton is the Vice President of Diversity, Inclusion, and Engagement for the Cleveland Cavaliers and operating companies. He's worked for other notable brands like Procter & Gamble, Russell Athletic, the American Cancer Society, and many, many more. A dad and a passionate person about the community. Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Jason, thank you. It's a pleasure to be joining you. Thank you.
Absolutely, buddy. Always fun to talk with you, and I'm so glad that we're getting to connect and have a little conversation. You and I mean, obviously you're with the Cavaliers, and you and I talk basketball a good amount when we connect, at least at first, and then we get to even more important stuff than basketball. But I'll just say this. I told you this the other day. I have loved the restart of the NBA. I think it's been amazing. I think the league has done a phenomenal job. I think the product on the court, like the basketball product, has been fantastic. I think you've been seeing, basketball stars that have been rising and shining. The safety protocols, the TV product, like all of that. I'm just really impressed with the way the NBA has done on this. But also, more importantly, their recent response to social justice and, even stopping play to support that. So your thoughts on kind of the NBA restart and just kind of getting back to basketball, but also these leaders that are using their platforms and their voices.
Yeah, Jason, the restart after being out for so long from a COVID standpoint was bittersweet for me. Our team was not one of the 22 or 23 that went down to Orlando for participation in the bubble. So one, being a basketball fan, man, that was great to see our game back on TV, but also knowing that from my side with the Cavaliers that our team was not playing. And the way it was scheduled now, it would have been, depending on when we start the season, say it's December or January, it would have been 8 or 9 months since our team would have played.
Yeah.
And as you know, by being a former hoopster, that's like having a major injury and trying to work back over that period of time. So with that, it was bittersweet, but it was great to see us back out there on the court as a league. And then, we had the situation with Jacob Blake recently that halted play for a couple of days. But I will tell you that I have never been prouder to work for an organization. And if you think about the NBA as the organization I'm referencing, not just the Cavaliers, but our league was responsive, and our league said, look, we will support the players, we will support their messaging, and to work for an organization that stands on its principles, regardless of the impact from a finance standpoint, TV rating standpoint, or popular opinion or political opinion. I'm fired up to do what I can do to continue, delivering the message of fairness and equality for everybody.
Yeah, no doubt. When I talked to you the other day about it, I got goosebumps and actually some tears in my eyes, which you were hidden from you behind the phone. But when I say I truly have never been. I was so proud of the league and the players for making that decision to stop playing, but also then to make it to use their voice, to message, to make it clear that change is needed. But also not give up their platform and say, we're going to get back to playing, but we're also going to make sure that this doesn't stop. This conversation doesn't stop. 2020 has been tragic, in so many different ways. Obviously, George Floyd, Jacob Blake, you said, Breonna Taylor, we go on and on with all these things that have been happening. And this is the moment. As I know when you and I talked about your role in diversity, inclusion, and engagement, that this is the moment where maybe change can happen. I love the way that you talk about this being not just a moment, but a movement. Say more about the time that we're in.
Yeah, Jason, I'm fortunate enough to have lived a number of years and going back to really remembering when Carlos Smith raised his hand at the 68, raised his fist at the 68 Olympics,
Yeah.
had his medal stripped from him, and then ostracized by an entire country and the Olympic community. And at that time, back in the 60s, it was, hey, this is a movement. This is about civil rights. And it kind of died down from the pressures from society. Civil rights just became kind of a part of our everyday life. It wasn't really a movement, if you think about it. It was really that moment in the 60s, and then it just kind of died down. Then you had other movements and you had other moments in sports, and sports has always been kind of a catalyst for change. Let it be the summit that was actually the sports summit that was actually held here in Cleveland, where Muhammad Ali was fighting against his right to not go to the draft, and you had Bill Russell and you had Jim Brown and you had others huddle up around him to say, we stand with you. And that was here in Cleveland, which was really the first sports summit at that time. Then you think about 1965, the Celtics. They actually were the first team to ever boycott. And my uncle was Sam Jones, and I don't think I ever told you that.
No, I didn't know that.
Sam Jones played for the Celtics, and interesting fact, because he has more rings than Michael Jordan does.
Yeah.
Now he played with Bill Russell, and that might have helped, but so be it.
He's got more rings than fingers.
Yeah, I know, right? So with that, that was 65 when the Celtics boycotted the game. And so sports has always been at the forefront of social change, and athletes have used this as a platform. As the George Floyd murder happened, and everybody, the world just kind of reacted around that. And I'm just sharing with you very honestly that I was troubled because there were organizations and companies and communities all making statements. And hey, we stand against violence and police brutality. Okay. And I kept asking, okay, why now? There were more Black people, white people, Europeans, it was Asian, it was everybody across the globe that was reacting to something that, quite honestly, I've seen all my life.
Yeah.
It wasn't new for me to see a Black man being killed by a police officer. Now, have I ever seen a Black man being strangled to death like that? No, but I've seen a lot of Black men and women being hung from trees, not with my own eyes, but pictures and stories from my ancestors and what have you. So as people were responding, the question that I was asking was, okay, is this a movement, or is this just another moment going all the way back through the 60s, as I was referencing? And I was responding in a very negative way to the one-off statements. You would have an organization like a Starbucks that said, hey, you can't wear Black Lives Matter shirts. And then there was a protest about that. A few days later, they're selling Black Lives Matter shirts. And I'm like, are we really substantively making change? Is this a sustainable way of us moving forward? Or is this a way to capitalize on the moment? So as I move forward in my own thinking and realize that, it really doesn't matter right now what is going on, why people are doing what they're doing. The fact is they're doing something.
Yeah.
And the dial is being moved a little bit further towards equality and the eradication of racism. However, the other thing that I was asking a lot of people, a lot of my white friends, and that was, what are you all mad about? I've had conversations with white men and women, and didn't matter what age, where they would break out into tears. And they're crying like, I didn't know. I'm like, what didn't you know? I didn't know that you all went through this. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, if that's the case, but what are you mad about? Well, it's just tragic how you're being treated. Okay, so I asked this question, Jason, and that was, are you upset at seeing how police officers actually use excessive force against George Floyd? Or are you upset about racism? Two totally different conversations.
Yeah.
Because I want people to be upset about racism.
Right.
I mean, the law enforcement challenge that we have in this country with excessive force and having over 18,000 law enforcement municipalities and agencies without standards, that's a system of law enforcement that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
That's one of many systems that we need to address. So I'm not that interested in putting all my energy against law enforcement. I want to fix systemic racism that impacts education, where in the Cleveland area, 40% of the dropouts from high school dropouts are African American males. I want to fix the healthcare system, and you have seen what's happened. It was more exposed now with COVID. We're almost to 200,000 people that have died in this country. 70% of those are Black and brown people.
Yep.
I want to fix the food deserts. I want to fix transportation. I want to fix economic empowerment, because there is data that would suggest that across all of those systems, Black and brown people are at a significant disparity versus whites. So in order for this to really be that movement that I'd love to see, I want us to focus on systemic racism as it impacts everybody, not necessarily what's going on from a law enforcement standpoint. That's just one of many.
Yeah, no, at the systematic level, I think at least what's promising is that at least we're talking about it now. And again, many people have been talking about it for many years, to your point, and certainly it's been out in front of everybody. But the fact, I think part of that outrage is at least, and part of the power when athletes and people with platforms stop and step back and say, no, but okay, we need progress and we need changes, and we got to talk about this so that the systematic elements of these can begin to change. The language that I bring to it, that you and I have talked about before, is the idea that conversations are the currency for change, that we have to begin to name it. We have to begin to talk about it. We have to begin to have conversations that are that currency for change. And when I talk about with teams and organizations about culture shaping and about helping us to have conversations that are going to shape a new future that we want to be a part of creating, we have to have conversations that allow us to then begin to identify those things that might be systematic and are right in front of us. So when you think about teams and organizations, you think about people in the world, what are those conversations, though, that we need to be having within our teams and within our organizations?
Yeah. So if I can put on maybe a corporate hat for a moment, because as you talked about teams, I know the work that you do is much broader than athletic teams, as much as we want to stay there. But as we're talking about teams and how the team dynamic is driven by conversation, creating an environment that allows people, regardless of what their similarities or differences are, to be able to have conversations about what they're challenged by and what they're faced with. And I'll just share with you a conversation recently that I had with a team member that, man, if I had this conversation earlier in my career in other places, it just would have gone, it just would have made life so much easier for me. So with that, the conversation went similar to this, where the individual couldn't understand, well, why is there so much focus on the conversation around Black Lives Matter? And what is it? Why we keep talking about it? Why does the league put it on the court? Why are there T-shirts? Why it's just all over? It's just political. And I come to work and I don't really want to see that. Okay, that's a person's opinion, Jason. Mm-hmm. What I shared was, it's about humanity, and that's what we're focused on. Black Lives Matter is about humanity. It's about a segment of our population that right now is, well, for 400 years has been under siege. But we as a American people are saying enough is enough. We need to address these systemic opportunities and issues and barriers. So the person was responsive and said, yeah, but when I come to work, I want to separate the two. And Jason, my response was, I would love to separate the two.
Yeah.
Except I don't have to wait to come to work to have that thought. It happens for me once my garage door goes up and I back out my driveway, that I'm reminded, particularly if I see a police officer or if a police officer is trailing me, the looks that I get by being in kind of a predominantly white neighborhood and being the only person of color, it's almost like, why are you here?
Mm.
And therefore, I can't leave that. I can't leave that outside. I bring it in with me because I'm bringing in the struggles. I'm bringing in the challenges. So until we reach a point where, we don't have to even have this conversation, which is when systemic racism is going to be eradicated, it comes into the workplace. It comes into
Yep.
our environment. So from a team standpoint, the conversation that we had that I'm sharing with you led to this person and I, him understanding at a much higher level, in a much deeper level, because of the willingness of me sharing with him and him sharing with me. So the intimacy of the friendship, which now was, it was expedited. It just exponentially rose to a different level because we were having real conversations that he didn't understand. And I never understood his point of view until we had the conversation.
Absolutely. And what I would say to that, Kevin, is that, it's become a convenient thing to say that I want to separate my work life, my personal life, my work life. And in fact, there's been a lot of work over the years where people have said that, no, I got to just put my head down, and I'm a one person at work and I'm another person at home. And the reality is that's just not true. Somehow we thought that was the case, but all of us as humans carry ourselves into work. And in fact, work is one of those places that if we're spending 8, 10, 12 or beyond hours of every day there, in my opinion, our workplaces become some of the most influential and important places for us to have those conversations that are the currency for change. Just yesterday, I was with 20 leaders from the Hilton, and we were sitting there, and literally for the 2-hour session, it was, I'm doing ongoing work with them, but this was a 2-hour session where the only purpose was for us to step back and to have conversations about everything that we've been experiencing over the last few months. And you're talking about people from different backgrounds that look different, and being able to say, hold on a second, if we're talking about developing as leaders and a culture moving forward, that in 2020, we've got to be able to have conversations that are the currency for change. And that doesn't mean we all just magically agree with each other on everything. That doesn't mean that people can't agree to disagree, but we have to get to a place where we have to be able to lean in, have those conversations that are the currency for change. I know that one of the ways in which you all are doing this in Cleveland, which is fantastic, is the alignment between the Cavs, the Indians, and the Browns, at least the three, professional clubs that have come together to say, no, together we want to leverage those platforms and to do some good and some community action. Say more about that collaboration or kind of what's going to come of that.
Yeah. So if you think about sports teams in cities, typically there's a competitive nature for the entertainment and the sports dollar.
Yep.
In Cleveland, we're a relatively small market. So the Browns are competing for their piece of the sports dollars. The Indians are, and the Cavs, which we also have the Cavs and the Monsters and the hockey team and all of that. So as historically, we were cordial, and we would come together on some things. Hey, we're doing a blood drive together and things of that nature. This was a very different moment, and it was historic because in no other city has this ever happened. And it started with a conversation with the Browns coach, Kevin Stefanski, and our head coach, Coach Bickerstaff. And JB and Kevin were having a conversation around, hey, why don't we just begin to try to collaborate on some things? That then escalated with Tito Francona coming in, and then it rose to the level of the general managers. And Kobe Altman, our general manager, Chris Antonetti, the Indians, and Andrew Berry with the Browns, they began to have conversations around what would that look like. They began to discuss what are the 3 critical areas where we think we can make change. One was voting, and that was to increase voter registration to get more people to vote, encourage people to vote. Secondly, it was around education. How do we close the education gap between communities of color and others? And then thirdly, from a law enforcement standpoint, how do we help with law enforcement reform? Some of those 18,000 jurisdictions that I referenced without any standards of consistency. How can we in Northeast Ohio begin to address that as well? So as they began to do that work, my GM, Kobe Altman, reached out to me and asked if I would facilitate and help in kind of leading us through this. And part of that had to do with the fact that with my title, I'm the only one of the 3 teams that we actually have someone who is at the executive level leading the work. So we put together a task force and a sub team of people, of which now we're focused on voting. And we have another group because most recently with the Jacob Blake shooting, we wanted to focus on law enforcement with education to come. And we're talking about sharing assets, and those assets have to do with partnerships that we may have with our media partners, assets from our players. If you think about the legends that we all have, the alumni, and how do we get them involved? So it's in its, I guess now 4 or 5 weeks since we've been working on it. We just made the announcement last week. So we are really focused now on all 3 of us coming together to drive people to register to vote. And we think from that standpoint, people doing their actually adhering to their civic responsibilities and going out to vote, that's one impact that we can make. And so far it's been great, but it's come together by the 3 of us understanding that social justice is something that we absolutely have a role in playing in. And Jason, for me, I've thought about sports, and the reason why I came back to actually work for the Cavs is sports is a Trojan horse to other social issues that we can bring to the table. We can get into any door, quite honestly, in this country by just saying, hey, it's the Browns, it's the Indians, it's the Cavs.
Yep.
And then we want to bring our community partners with us to put agendas on the table from a social standpoint.
Well, and what's great, and again, new just in the last few weeks is that collaboration and that spirit of, hey, okay, hold on, enough is enough. We got to come together and we got to work together to implement change, and together to use the platforms that we have to open those doors and begin this. I mean, you know the work that I do with teams and organizations and talking about defining leadership and helping them develop people and develop culture, help teams and organizations proactively shape the culture that they want. And then the development of how do we get clarity around mission, vision, and values and all that stuff. But I've also shared with you that I need to be a part of this conversation because of that I have a voice, and the posture that I've taken since all of this more vocal discussion has taken is to listen and to try to learn and try to understand. And the reality is I am a white male, and so my posture is to listen. But as you and I have talked and certainly have said, I want to be a friend, and I want to be a positive messenger in this. What do you say to people, to white folks or people that are hoping to be allies? What do you say to them? What do you say to us?
Yeah, so Jason, thank you for asking the question. And I mean, you've asked it before, and we've had some conversations. So let me bring that kind of private conversation to this format. And it really happened with the George Floyd murder. And as a number of white people, as I said, were asking, what can I do? How can I help? And people would say, Kevin, I want to be an ally.
Yep.
So let me just talk about allyship for a moment. And then I want to give some real clear tips around what people can do. So when I hear the term ally, I think about being on the sideline and cheering me on. Hey, I got your back, Kev. What do you need? How can I help you? You need me to make a phone call. Hey, I'm here for you. I like to use the analogy of being in a boat, being in a 2-person rowboat. And I'm in a sea of racism. My boat has holes in it, Jason. My boat is filling up with systemic racism. And I'm looking back up at you on the sideline, and you're saying, Kevin, how can I help?
Yeah.
Jason, I need you to come and get in the boat with me.
Mm-hmm.
I need you to come into the boat and help me bail water. I need you to figure out, okay, how are we going to plug this hole over here?
Mm-hmm.
Jason, I'm going to row while you plug this hole. And at one hand, I'm rowing, and the other hand, I'm bailing water. Because if you're not in the boat with me, and if you're on the sideline, then you're not feeling the challenge and the pain. And it's not that I want you to feel it, but I want you to understand it so that you can have empathy. And heck, Jason, once you're in it with me, you may have some ideas of how we collectively can get out of it versus me alone, which goes back to really the power of diversity, the power of mutual ideas and independent thinking of, wait a minute, how can we collectively do this together? When people of color, let me be more specific, when Black folks and white folks don't come together, we miss out on the richness of what diversity really is. And that's us sharing an idea together.
Yep.
You and I haven't played basketball before, but if we were to go out on the court and it's a 2-on-2 game, without either one of us saying anything, we will be able to pick up the vibes on, okay, wow, Jason can shoot. Let me get Jason the ball.
Yep.
Kevin can pass. Kevin can do this. So it's just the nuances of saying we're on the court together, and then we'll huddle up and we'll say, okay, let's develop a plan and let's figure this out. So from an allyship standpoint, and I get some feedback from people sometimes. It's like, no, Kevin, that's too harsh, telling people to get in the boat. No, hell, get in the boat with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are some of the steps?
I don't hear that as too harsh. And I know people obviously want to be sensitive and I guess don't want to offend me somehow or something, but I'm not offended by that at all. In fact, I'm encouraged by that to say that my friend wants me to get in the boat and try to help. And then we've got to get just like on the basketball court, which, by the way, yes, let's challenge whoever to a 2-on-2 game. I'm in, buddy.
Yep. There we go.
Just like that, we've got to then figure out and begin to develop strategies and figure out the pace at which we're going to play and how we're going to utilize the gifts and strengths of each other in order to be the most effective and best players and team that we can possibly be.
Right. And Jason, you're absolutely right. And here, once you're in the boat, here are the kind of 1, 2, 3, 4 steps that I want to share with my white brothers and sisters around. Here's kind of what you can do.
Great.
It's been 400 years of oppression. And what a lot of people forget when they see the imagery of Jason Blake and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, they see that moment. They don't see the 400 years of oppression from a group of people, a population of people that came here against their own will. We were brought here. And then once we were brought here, we were like, we're going to shackle you. You are actually going to be less than a human being. And you're basically going to be our slave.
Yep.
So with that, I'm asking you to understand the history of how we got to this point. Don't just take the moment, because there's a history of the Black family being divided in Africa, where it was, we're going to take a son to this part of the U.S., we're going to take a daughter to this part, husband, wife, we're going to separate you. So when people look at the Black family and they're like, oh, it's so dysfunctional. Well, hell, it's been dysfunctional for 400 years based on separation that wasn't voluntary.
Yeah.
So you have that part. So understanding the history of how we got here, because as you know, you're not going to be able to really move forward unless we really understand, okay, what were the dynamics that created where we are? And then how do we put a plan together? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, do not be afraid to ask questions. And I heard some of my white friends like, well, Kevin, is it okay for me to ask how you feel? As I shared with you earlier, if my colleague did not ask that one question, he would be walking around thinking one thing, I would be walking around thinking something else, and we never would have come together to have a real conversation. So don't be afraid to ask questions. We aren't going to be offended if you're asking from a spirit of honest ingenuity of wanting to know. The third thing that I will share as to what you can do, and that is, it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to try something.
Yep.
If it's out of the spirit of goodness and, again, empathy, it's okay. Another friend of mine offered a perspective, and it was somewhat offensive what he said to me, but because we had a relationship, that I just told him, I said, no, you don't want to say that. He's like, Kevin, I'm sorry. I'm like, okay, but it's fine. So to those points, learning about the history, jumping in and let's having some dialogue, ask questions and try some different things. And also ask us, what is it that we need at that particular time?
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you may jump in my boat and see there's water. You know, I only got one oar, but you know what? I may just need you to give me some encouragement.
Yep. Yep.
You know, just a few words. So engaging with us in solving the problem would be very helpful.
No, that's great, man, and I appreciate you sharing that. And again, the part of about making a mistake or being afraid to say something, unfortunately, that's the world that we've also lived in outside of even the discussion of race. That this, we live in. I did another podcast talking about this idea of criticulous. That we live in this criticulous world where everybody's a critic, and if you make a mistake, everybody's going to jump on you, and if you say the wrong word, people are going to jump on you, and you and we have to learn together, and we have to continue to do that. But we have to extend a level of grace to each other too, and say, hold on, we as humans, we misspeak, we don't have the right language at times, we just say dumb things, like, and so to have grace with one another and say, hey, I want to be in the boat with you. What's needed right now? And now, all right, let's get past whatever stupid thing I said last, and
Right.
what do we need next? And all of this, again, I connect it to things that I'm actively talking about with teams and organizations. But I think about this, that I talk about language driving behavior. And so language is important. Like, we got to come up and we've got to learn and discover and understand the language that we're actually trying to use. But right now in the world, we have an opportunity to redefine, what does authentic leadership look like? And I believe one of the things, we've always known it to be this, but one of the things that 2020 is revealing to us more is that authentic leadership is about being open. It's about being inclusive. That we have to be able to celebrate differences and be willing to get a little uncomfortable, to jump in the boat with one another and fumble our way through it. And in fact, leadership isn't about just having all the answers, but it's about seeking solutions together. So, seeking equity and viewing diversity and inclusion as just a part of the way that we move. I hope that these conversations are at least elevating the way that we define what authentic leadership really looks like.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I would also add to authentic leadership a term that you and I are both familiar with, and that is servant leadership.
No doubt.
And when I think about servant leadership, that's really leading from the rear as much as leading from the front.
That's right.
And allowing whomever you're leading to let those individuals kind of experience the same kind of challenges that we as maybe organizational leaders by title are experiencing. But it's really, how do we create an environment for everybody to have a chance to drive the car, to be in the driver's seat? And oftentimes what leaders do is that they focus more on themselves and having people follow versus standing behind and pushing people.
Yep.
And that right. is, slightly different way of looking at it. And as you talked about authentic leadership, I absolutely appreciate that, because that goes back to giving grace. It goes back to being authentic and saying, I didn't know, I made a mistake.
Yeah, I just believe that, and you're right. You and I, servant leadership is a term that we use a lot, and I just believe we're in the midst of unfortunately, the term leadership has been hijacked over the years, and we throw it around so loosely, and everybody talks about how important leadership is, and yet we oftentimes don't take the time to step back and define what is effective and influential leadership really look like. And you and I would say that it's not about being at the top of the pyramid where you bark out orders and tell everybody what to do and you're a leader by title, but you are actually flip that pyramid in your own mind and in your own heart, because you see that what it actually means to lead is to serve something greater than you, to serve other people. And part of that is, I believe, hopefully, we're just getting better and becoming more clear about the idea that we have to be open and inclusive and be willing to get in the boat with one another.
Yeah. Jason, you mentioned where kind of my career started. I started with P&G.
Yeah.
And I had a decade with Procter & Gamble. And for those of you that may or may not know about that company, it is a dog-eat-dog, best of best company. I mean, you don't,
Yeah.
the brands that they have, number one, year after year after year. And I learned then around being a go-getter. You know, hey, man, I had 70% of a shelf one time, and I got feedback from my managers like, why don't you have 80%? I'm like, well, our brands only should have 20%.
Yeah.
And, you know, so that spirit of just going after it and constantly just striving for it was a mindset that I had for so many years. And it wasn't until I had a challenging time that I picked up a book called The Go-Giver.
Yeah.
And
got it on my
the
shelf right over here. Yep.
Yep. The Go-Giver talks to servant leadership, giving first before asking for something. And when you come from a servant place in your heart,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make you less effective. It doesn't make you, less strong. I mean, it really just says, hey, I have another area of a strength, and that is that I can communicate with empathy, and I can ask you about your needs and focus on your needs, because ultimately, if I do that, I'm going to get mine.
Yep.
And and with that, my whole life changed once I understood that giving first, and in the spirit of what we're talking about, asking, well, Kevin, what can we do? What can white folks do to help Black folks? Understand that, just reach out and say, what can I do to help? How
Yep.
can I give first? And not be so concerned that, diversity, if we let them in, it's going to take away from me. No, my whole thing about diversity, why I've been very successful in this, is that adding people to the mix, if it's a community, if it's an organization, if it's a company, if it's a team, that bring different perspectives and different thought processes based on their life's experience to the organization. Yes, the slice of the pie you have right now might be a smaller slice, but the pie itself is going to exponentially grow. So that's the real fruits of diversity, because the pie is going to get bigger and we all will benefit. And that's the one thing that I would say has been a challenge, is that from a white leadership standpoint, there's this fear that they're going to lose something.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, no. The go-giver says, man, let me give, because everybody is going to be able to bring their authentic self to the organization. My pie is going to get bigger.
There's enough to go around.
We all win.
Yep. No doubt.
Yep.
Buddy, I could talk about this all day long with you forever, and I'm excited to be as I've told you from the very first conversation we ever had, I want to be a messenger and support, and I want to be a friend. I want to be an ally. I want to be somebody that's in the boat with you. I appreciate you taking the time. And I'm also excited that we're going to continue. I'm going to share your voice and others at my event coming up this fall, Thermostat Cultures Live, which everybody, listeners, stay tuned for that. More is going to come out, and at jasonvbarger.com, you can learn more about that. But Kevin's going to join me as a voice there, and continue to have conversations that are the currency for change. Because one thing I know is that progress right now, and progress always has required courage. It requires us to take a deep breath. It requires us to identify, well, what's the next step? And all teams and every culture on the planet right now, in my opinion, it needs leaders that are intentionally seeking solutions, are thinking about with that spirit of serving other people and inclusion, and going on the journey, getting in the boat together and taking the step. So, Kevin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Jason, man, it's always a pleasure to chat with you, man. Thank you for having me.
Yep, we'll have another chat here soon. Appreciate it very much. For all you out there listening, thank you for being a part of this chat. Continue to stay involved with this conversation. And, we're going to have other great stuff coming. So stay connected to the Thermostat Podcast at Jason V. Barger on social media. Track it down and continue to stay connected. Have a great day.